but tonight we are here to have a really great conversation with four fabulous writers. Very much looking forward to this, and I owe all of this to the moderator of our conversation, who is Shelli R. Johannes. And not only is she the author of award-winning series of YA books and now children's books, but she's a fierce and loyal friend to Broadleaf and to writers all around them. And I'm thrilled to welcome Shelli to this program and hand the reins to her so that she can take on this conversation. So Shelli, whenever you're ready, come on up.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Shelli.
I'm the person who's not on Instagram because Instagram has shut down my Instagram page for evidently racy picture book photos. So I was the inside joke in not being on Instagram, so, and being separated from everyone. So thank you.
It's so unfortunate because you're such an active presence on Instagram and all that. So
well, it's definitely been a learning lesson.
Yes. But anyway,
yeah,
I was trying to throw dirt on you before you got on here. But
yeah, no, that's good. I accept the dart.
That's all right.
And I will keep it in my back for the rest of the program. So we are here today to talk. I have some great authors that are here, and I will let them each do a minor introduction of themselves before we get into it. But I wanted to let everyone know that the purpose of this session is really to kind of pull back the facade of social media. And I think that I know I have been frustrated at times in being encouraged not to share bad news and in seeing nothing but good news, when I know that authors, no matter what place they are in their writing journey, have ups and downs. And I think that impression of just having ups and just having wins and sales and great reviews gives this impression to upcoming writers and new authors and struggling writers that the bar is too high for them to reach. So I wanted to bring in and introduce Kristin and Alan and Kimberly, who are going to be with us today to talk about some of the ups and downs in publishing and maybe give us some advice on how to continue loving writing and to continue writing during those hurdles. So I'm going to let them introduce myself. So Zach has already introduced me. I'm Shelli R. Johannes. I self-published a series a while ago that ended up being pretty successful and ended up moving over into children's picture books. And now with those coming out, I think I have 13 picture books. And I'm, slowly hoping to move back into YA. So Alan, why don't you give us a quick intro?
Sure.
Not that you need.
Oh no, I'm sure I do. So hey, I'm Alan Gratz. I'm the author of 17 books for young readers. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, and my first book came out. Yeah, thank you. My first book came out in 2006. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about our journeys here in a minute. And I've been really lucky to have about a book a year come out ever since then. Some of my more recent books that people might be familiar with are Refugee. That's been my big one that came out 3 years ago. Allies, Ground Zero, Prisoner B3087, Project 1065. A few of those have been New York Times bestsellers, which has been amazing. And we'll talk about that too, I hope. I'm a full-time writer living in Asheville, North Carolina. And the easy thing to see is the success that I've had. And one of the real reasons that I wanted to, when Shelli came to me and said, do you want to be a part of this panel? I jumped at it because like every writer, I have been through my share of ups and downs, and it's the downs that are invisible, at least the ones we don't talk about. We don't go on Instagram when we're allowed to and talk about them. And I'm actually eager to talk about the roller coaster that is a writing career.
Great. Thanks, Alan. Kristin?
I love that, when we're allowed to be on Instagram. Did you
Little
catch
dip.
that one,
Just
Shelly?
thought I'd get a little extra dig in there.
We're allowed, yes.
My name is Kristin O'Donnell Tubb. I am a big fan of all of the writers that I am co-paneling with. And they are longtime friends, all of them. So it's wonderful to be fans of your friends. It's a really cool position to be in. I write books for middle grade writers. My first book came out in 2008. My 10th book will come out next year. I write Service Dog series with Catherine Teigen Books, and I have a series set in the New York Public Library about the family that lived there with Henry Holt, and a bunch of other books that are mostly historical. Excuse me, mostly historical fiction. Big allergy season here in Nashville. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk about publishing as a business and publishing as it works, because writing can be difficult, but for the most part, writing is fun. But I'm really excited to talk about the business of publishing and the business of being an author. So thank you, Shelly, for this opportunity, and thank you, Broadleaf Writers.
Kim.
Hello. So I'm Kimberly Derting, and like Kristin said, we've all been friends for a long time. So it's really fun to do a panel with everyone here. And a lot of us, like, we've known each other for years. I started writing like a million years ago, like when I was in my early 20s, which is 30 some years ago. But I actually published, my first book came out in 2010, and that was The Body Finder, which is a book for young adults. So my first published books were for teens, and I have 3 series for teens, which total 10 books. I published with HarperCollins and Simon & Schuster. So I'm not somebody who just stuck with one publisher. I know some people have managed to stay with one publisher for their entire career. I was not that person. I feel like it's a business, and we'll talk about that, how kind of some people stay loyal, and that's not even loyal. It's some people have found their home with their publisher for life, and some of us like to jump publishers here and there. So, and again, like Kristin said, the business of publishing, which I think is different than writing. So I think that was kind of, for me, one of the surprises of writing is that it's not the same as the business side of things. So, and I'm sure we'll get into that. So like I said, I have 10 books for teens and young adults. And then I made the leap into picture books also, like Shelly jumped into picture books, and Shelly and I co-author. So I think we have 9 books in our Love Science series now. So we have I have 9 picture books also with Shelly. So that's a little bit about me.
Thanks. So I think what we're going to get into first is, I did want to say that this is not, I don't want this to be, a group of authors that's like, we have problems, even though we have published books. I think the intention of this is really just to let everyone know that there are ups and downs that are going to be through your entire career. And a lot of it is subjective. A lot of it is out of our control. And we want to encourage everyone to keep writing, keep finding your love for writing, no matter what hurdle you hit, because we all hit those hurdles, no matter what it looks like on the outside, that push us back, knock us down, make us want to give up. And so we're here to say, don't give up, because it's the people who jump over those hurdles, even if you fall, that are going to get published and see your dreams come true. So first, what I would like to do is let everyone just take maybe 5 minutes to give us a little overview of your journey. And then what we'll do is get a little bit into kind of a lightning round. We'll talk about what was our biggest surprise in publishing, what was our biggest hurdle, what was our biggest success. And then we'll talk a little bit about what we try to do to separate the business from the writing and to kind of keep going during those times. There have been many times where I have wanted to put my pen down, and many times I have put my pen down. So that's kind of what we're here for. So, Kristin, why don't you give us a little overview of how you got started and how you got to be where you are today?
Okay, I left my job at a .com. Remember when they were called .coms? I left my job at a .com in 2002. I am very lucky to have a partner who, when I came home complaining every day about my job, he said, "You've always wanted to be a writer. Why don't we? Now is the time." We had just gotten married, but we didn't have kids, and so I said, "Don't tell me twice, because I really will do it." So I did. I left my job in 2002. And as I said earlier, my first book came out in 2008. So in that 6 years, what I actually spent was I went to a lot of conferences. I read a ton of middle grade books. I knew that was where I wanted to go. Um, and I started working for a publisher that does work for hire. And I know that's not the route for everybody, but this was a great route for me. I ended up writing a ton of books like Scooby-Doo books, Bugs Bunny, Powerpuff Girls, those kinds of things. And for me, it was a masterclass in voice. Learning how to write a book that the people who make Scooby-Doo approves of as Scooby-Doo is really very cool. And so it was really very interesting and a lot of learning. Those books are very churn and burn, though. You are offered an assignment, and usually you have about 2 weeks to write the book. So you really do have to turn it around very quickly. So I knew in my heart that I still wanted to write novels, that I wanted to write my own characters. I wanted to tell the stories of my heart. And so I was very fortunate to have my first book come out, Autumn Winifred Oliver Does Things Different, in 2008. And yeah, I've been publishing fairly steadily, not a book a year up until recently. But probably the last 5 or 6 years, yes, it's been about a book a year. And it's a lot to juggle the marketing of the books that are out. And Alan can, I'm sure, talk about this a lot. Along with creating new books, that's very much a juggling act, but it's one that you really do fall into very much a groove. And so it's very nice. Yeah. Thanks.
Kristin, just correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that you sold your first book without an agent.
I did, yes.
And
I sold
then you ended up getting an agent who is Josh Adams from Adams Literary.
Yes, I did.
And you've been with him ever since, right?
What's that? I'm sorry.
You've been with him ever since?
I have. I've been with him, yes. 12 years. Yeah.
I wanted everyone to know that you sold yours without an agent, and then you ended up getting an agent who you're still with.
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Kim, why don't you go?
So as I already kind of mentioned, I've known since I was like 12 years old that I wanted to write. I took a journalism class in junior high and fell in love with writing, and knew then that I loved writing. I thought then that I wanted to be a journalist, and then realized that journalists do things like go off into war zones and jungles and don't take showers for days, and realized, no, maybe that's not my thing. And they have to get facts, every single fact right. And I'm not really kind of that person. I really like creative writing, and took a creative writing class in high school, and really realized that I love telling stories. I was always kind of the daydreaming kid in school also. So really loved kind of creating stories, and started writing. I was a horror fan. You know, I grew up in the 70s and 80s. So I love Stephen King and John Saul. And those were the books I cut my teeth on when I went from like Charlotte's Web to grown-up books, you know, like took that leap like 12, 13 years old. So my first book that I wrote was in my early 20s, and it was a horror book, and it was terrible. I mean, I was going to be the next Stephen King as far as I was concerned. And it really had it had a plot, but it was very convoluted. There was like this ghost that made appearances all over the place. But one thing I did is I sat down and finished a book. I had this 90,000 word book from beginning to end. And it was, as awful as it was, it took me like a year and a half to write, which is pretty good considering I did it on a typewriter, because it was back in the days of I had this chunky kind of word processor thing, and I had floppy disks that I would put in it. And so it was kind of impressive that I actually sat down and wrote a book. But like I said, it was terrible. And my problem then, and I think this is a lot of writers' problems, is I didn't know when to give it up. So I revised that book for like 10 years. I couldn't give up the idea that this wasn't a good book. So I would send it out. I would write query letters, on my little typewriter and send them out snail mail to agents for years and years. And I would get some feedback here and there, and I would revise it again. And at some point, I don't even know, like maybe 15 years in. So I spent years working on this book, and young adult came along. I think it wasn't Twilight, but there was somebody gave me this young adult book from England, and I thought, oh my gosh, my character was 16 in my horror book. I could write a young adult book. And so I sat down and I wrote a book, like in my first book, The Body Finder, not my first book, obviously, but I decided I would finally give up on this book that I'd been working on. And I learned so much from that book, but I was finally able to give up on it. And my husband said, why don't you go pitch to an agent in person instead of sending queries this time? And that was when BEA was going from coast to coast. Back in like 2008, they were still going New York to LA alternately every other year. And so they were going to be in LA in 2008, I think it was. I decided to go, and I did one of their pitch sessions and pitched an agent in person. I made a list of all the agents. I picked the agent I wanted the most. I pitched her first, which was a terrible idea because I didn't have all the kinks out of my person-to-person pitch. And she said, send me your first 50 pages. And the rest is history. Like, she signed me, she sent it out on submission. It was picked up by HarperCollins, and that was The Body Finder.
And Kim, Kim is with, I almost said Laura Perkins. Kim is with Laura Renner at Andrea Brown. So she has been your agent the whole time.
Yeah.
I bring that up because we're about to move to Alan, who I believe has had a different experience as well as myself. So Alan, you want to give us a little overview before we get into the challenges?
Sure. Yeah. So like Kim, I knew I wanted to be a writer since I was a little kid. I went to college, and I thought about for a hot minute being a journalist, but it wasn't for me the fear of being sent to a war zone. It was the fear of covering garden shows and dog shows for the rest of my life. So but I'd always wanted to write fiction. I just didn't think I could because I didn't have anybody in my life who did. And I knew other people in town who wrote for newspapers, and I grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee, and it seemed like you had to live in Los Angeles or New York or something to write books or movies and that sort of thing. And I just didn't think it was available to me. But I really wanted, it was my passion was writing fiction. So I very quickly transferred over to all fiction writing in college, graduated with an English degree with a concentration in creative writing, and then spent the next 10 years doing odd jobs that none of which was a career, but each one was a job that where I wrote or used words, use my love of books. For example, I was the copywriter and the newsletter writer for the Knoxville Museum of Art for a year. I was the radio commercial writer for a group of radio stations, 6 radio stations, where I wrote 6,000 radio commercials in a year. And Kristin talks about that trial by fire of writing the IP stuff. I learned how to write on deadline, and I learned how to write to the word. Radio ads have to be 60 seconds, not 59 seconds, not 61 seconds. They have to read out at 60 seconds. And sometimes I wrote them with the client standing behind me, watching me write. And so I learned to write and not be precious about my stuff, which was a huge lesson, and one that Kim learned the hard way about letting go of something that you love. And I'm still bad about that. Every writer is, but I learned to be less precious. I worked in a library. I wasn't a librarian, but I shelved other people's books. I worked in a bookstore selling other people's books. And eventually I worked as an 8th grade English teacher teaching other people's books. And the whole time I was doing all this, I was writing my own stuff and throwing it out there and trying to throw it against the wall to see what stuck. I was writing comic book scripts and I was going to comic book conventions trying to sell them. I was writing TV scripts and sending them in from Knoxville, Tennessee, thinking somebody in LA was going to buy these because I didn't have any idea about the industry. I was writing plays for community theater where I got paid like $600 a play. And then my wife got a job as the book and toy buyer for a group of independent bookstores. And she came home with all of the middle grade MYA that was being published at the time. This was the late 1990s. And it was amazing stuff, right? I mean, like The Golden Compass had just come out and Speak by Laurie Halse Anderson had just come out. And she was like, read this, they're amazing, they're amazing. And I read all this stuff and I said, this is amazing, I want to be a part of this. And I put everything else aside and I said, I'm going to focus on writing books for kids. And I started going to all the conventions too. I think I probably met Kristin at a convention. I know I met Shelli going to a convention. We carpooled together to one for an SCBWI at one point. So like I started going to conventions and learning everything I could and reading as much as I could. And I wrote 2 novels and sent those out through snail mail, trying to get through the slush pile at publishers. This was, again, right around 2000. I mean, the transition from the 90s into the 2000s. Now, if you're doing this, go for an agent. Don't go for the slush pile first. Try to get an agent first. But back then, this was kind of a thing that still could happen. And I kept sending things out, but I was working in my weekends, my evenings, my summers home when I was a teacher, and nothing was hitting. And then in 2002, my daughter Josephine was born. And my wife and I had to decide if one of us was going to stay home and take care of her. And my wife said, Alan, it's been your dream since you were a kid to be a writer. Why don't you quit your job? I was teaching at the time, stay home, be a stay-at-home dad, and make this work. I had already had those 2 books that I was sending out. I was getting all kinds of rejection letters on those. Sometimes in the same day, getting one rejection letter that said, we love your characters, but your plot needs work. And the next letter I opened would say, we love your plot, but your characters need work. I mean, it was that kind of thing where I was just running around in circles, chasing this dream. But I felt like it was close. I was getting good rejection letters, and there is such a thing. The bad ones are the photocopied ones that are crooked and just don't even have a name on it. And there you just get it back that says, no, we don't want your book. The good ones are like, oh, I just bought a book like this, or I'd be interested, or you're close, send me the next thing that you do. You know, like you getting these, especially back then when I was submitting directly to editors. And so I thought I was really close. So I did. I quit my job. I stayed home. At first, I was more of a dad than I was a writer. I had a baby at home, but while she was napping, and my wife had a job where she was home for a week and gone for a week. So like while she was home and I could hand her off, I would run down to my office and I worked on my books, and I wrote what was then the first draft of Samurai Shortstop. And that became the very first book that I sold and had published. That book sold before my daughter turned 1. So my professional writing career dates back to the first year that my daughter was with us, and she's now she just turned 19 last week. So I can always look back and say how long I've been at this because of how old she is. So that book didn't come out again, in, like I said, until 2006. I published 5 books with Penguin. That was my first publisher, and things were great. I mean, I liked Penguin just fine. They didn't put a lot of publicity or anything behind my books. I wasn't a big author, or wasn't one of their lead authors, but they were supportive. But then my editor left to have a baby and to start a family and didn't come back. And I kind of got orphaned at Penguin. I even had a book deal, I think still 1 book, and I kept submitting things, and they just didn't, nobody wanted it. Nobody wanted to go for it. And this was right around, unfortunately, 2008, 2009, which is when the recession hit. So suddenly I have no editor. I'm not selling anything. My editor at the time, I'm not going to name names. I will say that I've had my agent. I've had 4 agents. I'm with Holly Root right now, and love her. But my agent at the time was sending stuff back and saying, no, I can't sell it. It's not good. I can't sell it. And because of the recession, I had no school visits. But school visits have been a huge part of my income since I began writing for kids. And so in one entire calendar year, I had no book sales and I had no school visits. And it was a really rough time for me and my family because mine was the primary income at that point. And it was it was a really tough time. And I thought about quitting. I knew I wouldn't because I loved writing so much, but I didn't know what I was going to do. When you're at that point, you'd have no control over your career really. And like they say in Hamilton, I wrote my way out. That year I wrote 5 books because I wasn't traveling and I didn't have anybody buying anything from me. So I just knocked a bunch of stuff out. And I was lucky to get some IP work. Like Kristin was talking about, I ended up writing some choose your own adventure style books that were branded differently. I wrote a Star Trek novel that was work for hire where I didn't get royalties. Loved doing that, but it was just money in the bank. It was just money to keep going. And then very luckily, one of the books that I had written in the past got noticed by my current editor at Scholastic, Amy Friedman. It was historical fiction, The Brooklyn Nine. And she said, hey, we've got this gig where we have a Holocaust survivor who has an incredible story, and we're looking to pair him up with somebody to tell that story. Are you interested? And it was an incredible story. That's the book that became Prisoner B3087. And it was the first book I did with Scholastic. And I've been really, really fortunate now to have a second half of a career and really a Phoenix-like side of my career at Scholastic, where now I'm well known for those books. A lot of kids don't even know I wrote those first 5 books or anything, or the IP work that I did. So like I said, I've had 4 different agents, and I'm not the kind of person to be a diva and jump around. It's more like things just weren't working out, and I had to make the hard decision to move on. Now I'm super happy, but I've been at multiple publishers, often not by choice. I've had multiple agents, often not by choice. I'm super happy to be where I am now, but it was a real roller coaster to get here.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned the 4 agents, because I knew that you had.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. I'll tell a little bit about myself, and then we'll get into the lightning round. But without going too far back, I have an MBA. I mean, I have a master's in marketing, and I'm a copywriter. I'm a freelance copywriter today. I've worked with companies such as Spanx or Goody Hair Products, Chick-fil-A. And so I've always written. My journey's a little bit different in that I started probably in like 2004, 2005, and could not get an agent. I wasn't good enough. I didn't hit the market at the right time. I spent years trying to get an agent. Finally, I think in 2000 and maybe I started earlier. So it was like 2009, I got an agent. And what I will say is an agent that you don't connect with is worse than an agent than no agent. I have learned that the hard way. Great agent, like my first agent, was wonderful, communicative, supportive, great editor. But if you just don't connect on that writing level, it just doesn't work. So I had several books go to acquisitions through that agent that did not sell. It was YA and middle grade. My agent and I parted, and I kind of threw in the towel for a while and ended up self-publishing all of those books that did not sell. And surprisingly had some success with those in the market for several years, and had vowed not to get another agent until I went to a conference. And I think we all have met our agents at a conference or at some networking type of situation. And she, at the time, was a digital manager for Andrea Brown Literary Agency. And so she appreciated my self-publishing. At the time I self-published, I kind of was a pariah in the industry. A lot of people openly did not support me. That was the time where ebooks was questionable. Why are people self-publishing and going against traditional? So it was kind of a hard decision to do that. And so I think this agent, my agent now is Laura Perkins, and I've been with her since 2013. She, I think, saw the glimmer of success in how I was self-publishing and making a name for myself. So she was the only person. She was at a conference. At that conference, I ended up winning best chapter and best pitch. And she wanted to see that YA book. I ended up going with her. That YA book did not sell. And then in 2015, Kim and I started writing picture books just kind of out of the blue after my daughter said something that gave me an idea, and I ended up in picture books. So that's kind of where I've been at that. So I did want to mention to everyone that the conferences, sometimes we see those conferences, they're like, they're not worth it. Everyone here has met their agent or networked through some kind of conference, SCBWI, or other conferences, Broadleaf. So go to the conferences, because that is where you get a chance to meet those people. So I did quit writing, at least for the traditional industry, for several years, disgruntled and disheartened.
Real quick,
yeah.
Can I share very quickly? And this, I had forgotten about this until we started talking about querying agents. But you know, back in the day when you were sending out a self-addressed stamped envelope, you were waiting months and months to hear back. And I finally heard back from this agent, and he sent me back my own query letter, and all it had on it was written "no" in blue ink.
It's a brutal business.
So there you go.
So what I wanted to get into next was, you know, what are some hurdles? I want to talk about the hurdles first. So we obviously all had hurdles in trying to get, you know, agents and sell books. But Kim, you know, what do you feel like has been your biggest, like, since you've sold books, you've had a successful career, you know, 19 books at this point now planned, with some surprise ones in works. So what has been your biggest hurdle that you've tried to overcome in publishing?
I mean, biggest hurdle, there are a lot of little, like, I feel like now when I look back on them, what I thought were my biggest hurdles, more like stumbling blocks now. When the Body Finder was coming out, you know, it originally had a publication date of 2009, and at some point they decided to push it 6 months. And at the time it was my first book, and it felt like the most devastating thing in the world. And for whatever reason, they thought it needed to be a spring book. And I was crushed by that news. And that, now I look back, and that seems like such a small hiccup in my road. I think I've had a different editor on every single book I've written, other than the picture books. Every single teen book, I lost an editor on every book. So I had a different,
in the series, you had multiple editors in the series.
Yeah. I lost so one of my editors was kind of like, I had Farron Jacob, am I supposed to say names? She's a great editor. She's awesome. She was like the head editor at Harper Teen, but she would have associate editors edit me. And so she had a different editor for every single book. She would move, somebody would leave, because that's kind of the way people get promoted in publishing, is they kind of have to leave house a lot of times to go to another house to get a promotion. So I would lose editors. And at the time, the first one was heartbreaking. And then along the way, I just kind of got used to it. I am pretty adaptive. And so I would learn, okay, so I'm going to learn how to roll with someone else. And they would have to learn how to jump in the middle of my series and pick up where the last people left off. And so it felt terrible at first, and then I got used to it, and I learned new things. Every editor has a different way of editing, has different pet peeves, has a different style, has different things to teach. And so they became they became teachable moments for me. I think if I was going to pick one, what did you say? Not hurdle, but what was my biggest,
just your biggest, like, you know, letdown.
My biggest letdown is probably, my series, The Taking, was supposed to be kind of like, it was the one I got the largest advance on. It was the one that the publisher put the most backing into. They sent me out on big tours. I think we all thought it was going to be a big deal, and it failed miserably. And so in the eyes of the publisher, I felt like a failure, and the book was a failure. I felt like a failure. I felt like I let them down. I felt like I let myself down. I felt like I let my agent down. I felt like I let the tour down, even like in some ways. Like I felt like I was just kind of being pulled along and kind of like, it was awful. It felt awful.
Yeah, and that's what I want to get into today is these really kind of deep, you know, things that start chipping away at our confidence, you know, as a writer. And, you know, it sucks to have a big book that people back and then it just doesn't get the sales numbers.
And I felt like it was some of my best writing. So that was very frustrating because I felt like it was my 7th book.
Yeah.
And so for me, it felt like I had learned so much. I loved the book. I thought, well, like I was really expecting it to do well. And for some reason, it just didn't hit. I feel like
I feel like as writers that it's a trajectory and it's not. It's really a roller coaster. There's ups and downs. There's never just a way up. I mean, I know best-selling authors that have hit the New York Times bestseller list and then have not been able to sell. You know, one of my biggest hurdles was in our picture book series. Our you know, illustrator was changed in the middle of the series, which was very difficult. And it doesn't sound like a difficult idea, but it does when you're trying to get marketing to back you and to get people to stay excited when they were excited. And we ended up with a great illustrator. But at the time, you know, we thought we had it made because Vashti Harrison was our, you know, illustrator, but she got so busy, she couldn't continue. So that was a big kind of letdown. And it was the first point I kind of realized, whoa, like, you know, it isn't just stair step after stair step. And then, you know, one of our other picture books, you know, was not picked up by Barnes and Noble. And then another one came out during the pandemic and just killed our sales. So poor Libby, if anyone needs a picture book, buy Libby because Libby has gotten shafted during the pandemic. And so that's a huge letdown because Barnes and Noble ended up canceling our order for Libby during the pandemic. And that was heartbreaking after we had had a lot of success with Cece. So, Kristin, like, what would you say is kind of, I know you've had several, what would you say is kind of one of your biggest just letdowns or hurdles?
Yeah. I know you've been let down a lot, Kristin.
I know your career has really sucked, Kristin. Can you find just one moment to highlight?
It's the lowest of the low.
I'm trying to just give everybody an idea that we've all had some successes, but we've had some serious hurdles that we've had to really like try to overcome emotionally.
Yeah, no, I'm nodding along with all of it because I love what Kimberly said about how almost like when you look back, they're more like potholes than like a really huge, you know, wall or something like that. And I'm hoping that that is the case with 2020. I really think all of us hit definitely it's a world circumstance that no one saw coming. And that like, just like Alan mentioned, the 2008 recession, there's no control over it. And so for me, 2020, that's why I was picking up Zeus Dog of Chaos. It came out in June of 2020, right when everything, you know, it was just wild. No one, it was like wildfires, literal wildfires were going on in the world. And so, yeah, you just have zero control over that. And you also have to just be able to be okay with letting that go. It's very difficult to do, especially like Kim said, I think this is the funniest book I've ever written. And I'm happy to report that later it won a humor award, which I'm very proud of and excited about. But it was a very slow takeoff. And when you put so much love and so much work into something like a book, and then totally out of your control, you have no way of really sharing that story with the world. That's very difficult to come to grips with. And you just have to. I mean, there's no other, you have to pivot. So luckily I was pivot. Luckily, like, you know, I have a wonderful relationship with Parnassus Books here in Nashville. And I approached them and said, are you guys doing virtual events? Let's do a virtual launch. And they pivoted on a dime and changed my my launch to virtual. I was their second virtual event. I was supposed to be first, but we had to change it. And I was their second virtual event. And they were like, thank goodness it's you, because we can just, you know, try a bunch of things and see how it works. And they're wonderful and awesome and work so hard. So yeah, I think that's it. I think that it's coming to terms with the fact that there is so much. Oh, and one thing too, like Alan, I do a ton of school visits. And not being able to do those in 2020 and coming in, and hopefully though, coming into this year, hopefully we can get some more. I love doing them. I'm really hoping that that's something that, you know, we can add back into the mix very, very soon. But yeah, it's coming to terms with the fact that there are just things beyond your control,
Yeah.
and you just have to find some way to pivot and make it work. And it's so hard to do, and it's heartbreaking. It's
Yeah.
heartbreaking. in
And
so many-
unfortunately, you know, you have about 80%, you don't have control over the market. You don't have control over the marketing that your publisher does. You don't have control over the sales. And those are, you know, it's a business and it comes down to sales and numbers. And, you know, no matter how much a publishing house or editor or you love your book, you know, there are times where you want to do something, but you can't. Alan, what would you say is one of your biggest hurdles? I know it
So
sounds like you going through so many agents is frustrating,
I
but
was
after you've had
that was
so
tough.
much success, like, is there something that you can share that, you know?
Sure. So, like Kim said, for me, it's been a lot of road bumps without sort of. I mean, that big 2008 2009 recession and hitting when it did in my editor leaving to have a family and that sort of thing was really the biggest thing, the biggest hurdle that I've overcome. But along the way, I've written 8 novels that no one's ever bought in their entirety. Along the way, since I've been published, I had a series that I was really excited about. That was a young adult mystery series based on Shakespeare plays that I really loved. It was my second and third books, and I had a third book in that series, what would have been my fourth book, sold. And I had it all plotted out like I do back here on my board, and had spent months figuring it out. And my editor called me up one day, and I said, "I'm super excited that you called. I just finished my outline yesterday. I'm getting ready to write this." And she said, "Don't, we're canceling the book." Because the sales on the first 2 haven't been good enough to do the third one. And so you need to come up with a new book idea for us. And I had just spent, you know, months coming up with that book idea. I had one from at a different publisher where I sent in idea after idea after idea, and she said, "No, no, 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 we don't like any of these." I had a contract. And it was a mistake. I learned, and this was a lesson I learned. I signed an open contract that didn't say like, "We want this particular book from you. We just want to buy a book from you."
Oh,
That was
God.
great. But then I had to keep submitting books, and they kept saying no to the ideas. And they had first look at everything that I submitted. So it was a real career, like, stall. It just stalled out my career. So finally I got her to say yes to a book that I really love the idea of, a young Captain Nemo, like how he becomes the Captain Nemo that we see in the Jules Verne books. And I spent a year and a half researching and writing this book because I wanted to set it in India and have all this real life stuff. Because anyway, so I turn it in and I don't hear anything back from her for a long, long time. In fact, it took her a year to reply to the manuscript at all. And I thought this was early in my career, and I thought I was being the good good author and not poking her and not bothering her. And finally I had to get my agent and say, like, "Please, you got to find out what's going on with this book." So we finally had the phone call, and she says, "This is really great. But what if you took the Nemo part out?" And I was like,
It's about Captain Nemo.
it's the whole thing is about young Captain Nemo. And I said, "So do you want just like a whole new book?" And she said, "Yes." And I was like, "You're effing kidding me, right? I mean, like, you've got to be I just spent like 2 years of my life working on this and waiting for you." And she didn't call me back, apparently, because she didn't want to drop that on me. And I was like, "You're just killing me." So I have had a lot of no's from editors and agents in my life. And the hard thing about, I have a good writer friend who says, as soon as you hear a no from an editor or an agent, that becomes like their default to you.
Right.
Like, oh, once you've had one no, one thing that didn't work, or one thing that was a stumbling block, from that point on, it's like an uphill, you're pushing a boulder uphill to try and get them to say yes to something else. And so I think that the biggest thing in my career overall has been trying to find people in this business, editors and agents who will be my allies and believe that I have more in me, even when there's a bump in the road, who will say yes instead of no. And that's, that again, a lot of times that's out of our control, and you take the opportunities that you get, whether they're super positive or not. But you talked earlier, Shelli, about finding that about an agent and an agent being right for you or not. You know, I took the first couple of people to come along because I was eager to get my foot in the door, and they were not the right people for me. And then I had an agent who kept telling me no, and I let that go on for far too long. And so it's all about finding somebody who will be who will rally you and who will be your bulldog and believe in you and get out there and believe in you more than you believe in yourself.
Yeah.
But finding those people in the business is really tough.
And it's very subjective. And I think we've talked a little bit about surprises on sales and, bad reviews and, like thinking our career just goes straight up. I want to, because we only have like 10 minutes left, I just want you guys to go around and maybe give everyone one piece of advice on how you keep that love of writing and how you push through those hurdles, whether it's getting an agent, losing sales, not getting a proposal picked up when you've had some wins. Like what, Kim, let's go with you first. What would be your biggest piece of advice? I'm going to skip the surprises, but what would be your biggest piece of advice on how people can kind of move past the hurdles that they're finding in their writing career, whether it's from the at the very beginning, getting an agent, editor, a book not selling?
I guess we kind of talked about it a little earlier, kind of when Kristin brought up the business of publishing. I think you have to focus on the fact that the business of publishing is separate from the writing, because like Alan was saying, he knew he wanted to be a writer since he was a little kid. Shelli, I know you did too. I don't know when you knew Kristin, but I knew I wanted to be a writer since I was a little kid. And you kind of have to remember that love of writing is where it all started. Like I get frustrated when I'm writing, when I'm in the middle. Nobody wants to read anything I've written ever because it's all garbage. But like, really, like the writing is what I'm doing it for. Like, I'd like to think I could be that person who could just move up into the mountains in a cabin by myself and just forget the world and write. And I probably would. I mean, I'm a little bit afraid that if my family said, see ya, like I would just be fine in a room by myself and my old typewriter. Like, so I think you have to separate the fact that you have a story, a story, whatever to tell, from the fact that publishing is a business.
Kristin, what about you? What do you think? What would be some of your advice that you would give people who are kind of hitting those hurdles?
I think I would ask, what is it about writing that you love? I think that kind of, sings to Kimberly's point of that the writing is what it's all about. The writing is the only thing you can actually control. And so if you love it and whatever makes you drawn to it, whether it's that you want to share stories with children specifically, or if you have a vast family history and that's what you want to share, or what is it that makes you passionate about your stories, keep going back to that. That's your well. And so keep filling that well, and try to keep those two things separate, because I'm the same as Kimberly. I do it because I love stories. I think stories are the best way that we share as human beings. Keep going back to that.
Alan, what about you?
Another writer friend of mine, Toby Buckell, I have to give him a shout out for this because it was him who he was the one who told me this. And so I don't own this, but it was genius when I heard it, and I will try and I share it with everybody I can now. Don't celebrate the things that are out of your control. That is, when you make a book sale, that's actually not something that was in your control, because there are 1,000 other factors that led to that person calling up and saying, we want to offer you a contract on a book. You know what you did control? You controlled getting up every day and working on that book. You controlled finishing that book. You controlled revising that book, right? So now my wife made me a cake just the other day. not because I sold a book, but because I finished writing the book that I had already sold and turned it in. That's the part of it that I had control over, right? Like he always said that, and he didn't, he also says he's a short story writer he writes science fiction, fantasy, short stories for adults. And in the short story business, you send out a ton of short stories and you get a ton of rejections, like lots more than a novelist, because you have a lot faster turnover rate, right? And he celebrated every 100 rejections, not because he'd been rejected 100 times. He would pop open a bottle of champagne every 100 rejections, not because he'd been turned down, but because he'd had the perseverance to send out 100 stories. And he was celebrating that perseverance and that dedication. Celebrate the things that you have control over and let go of we're human. We're going to be disappointed when a book doesn't sell. We're going to be disappointed when a book gets canceled or all those bad things that we talked about. But celebrate the things that you have control over and that you did because of your own will and your own love of writing. And so like I sometimes when I'm done with a big project, I buy myself a gift. That was another Toby thing. He bought himself his first Xbox years and years and years ago for finishing a project, and then ended up later on becoming a New York Times bestseller for writing a Halo book, which he played on his Xbox. And like I'm going to buy myself FIFA for my own game system as soon as it comes out in October, as a celebration for turning this book in. So celebrate the things that you have control of. Buy yourself gifts, make yourself a cake, pop open a bottle of champagne, but don't do that. Certainly be glad of the good things that happen that come your way when other people give you accolades, good reviews, or book deals, but celebrate the accomplishments that you worked for.
So yeah, that's great advice. I would say my advice, what changed my writing is Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic. It really got me thinking about how subjective creativity is, how subjective stories are, and that I'm a writer at heart. Even if I don't sell a book, or if a book doesn't sell, I couldn't stop writing if I wanted to. I love writing, so I need to find a way to love that writing process and love that experience and love those ideas, because I'm always going to write. I also have kept my copywriter career going because I don't want to depend on my writing. It caused me so much pressure to quit copywriting. And then I was like, oh my God, I have to sell. I've got to bring in money. I've got to do this. I've got to do this. I need to justify my writing. And it just put so much pressure on my writing that it was just like Elizabeth Gilbert says, like, I'm the dark street at the end of the corner. No creative ideas want to go there. They want to go to the happy house that's having fun. So I would say read Big Magic and just, I promise, like everyone who is writing, like you can be good enough. If you're going to craft and you're going to conferences and you're listening to the feedback and you're getting critiques, you are good enough. The business is subjective. It is timing based. It is a lot of luck. And you have to write your stories. Like our world was built on storytelling. So do not give up your stories. Do not give up your heart. I mean, you would be giving up your heart if you gave up writing. So as far as I'm concerned, when I'm writing, and I'm trying to get back to that now, because I'm still struggling now, because I've written a couple of YAs that either my agent was like, this is not your next book, or that all of a sudden sold on Publishers Weekly. That was the exact same book after I spent 2 years on it. So I'm just like, if I could write anything, what would I write? I'm totally stepping out of my box into like a secret project because I just want to find that fun again. So, business of writing is separate than your love of writing. And that would be kind of my biggest thing. So I'll kind of end on that and see if there's any questions. I know that we're kind of down to the wire and that it's a Facebook Live. So if anyone has any questions, I think they're, Zach, what do you think? You have any questions?
I think like any writer, we're going to shoot right on past our deadline. And so a few things here. One, Shelli, I don't want to alarm you, but there's a bear over your shoulder.
Yes, I am actually where Kim doesn't want to be, which is a cabin by myself writing. And I treated myself this week to go away for a few days and spend some time with myself and with my new idea to kind of nurture it. So I will be in the cabin in the woods by myself without my family, without Instagram, with no work, no connection.
We had more comments about your board back there, Alan. So you might have to move your head out of the way. I think some people want to take a picture.
Yeah, I'll do a quick.
And then
Yeah,
they're going to
so-
sell it, Alan. They're going to sell your
Yeah.
idea once
I
they.
know
Yes,
it's already
exactly.
sold. It's already turned in.
Oh,
I'll
okay.
beat you. I'll beat you to them. I'll beat you to it. So you can't do it. I use this big board. It's an insulation board bought at Lowe's, covered with fabric. The yellow stripe has nothing to do with the outline. It's just decoration. But I use like sort of an 8-block structure, and you can kind of see the 8 blocks all the way out. Each of those little half cards is a chapter. And this was originally 4 different characters, so that's why there's 4 cards in each row. You got cut down to 3 in the writing process. But I outline all my books up here on the big board before I write them, and it ended up being my backdrop because this is my office and it's where I do all my broadcasting from.
Alan, just to
Fantastic.
clarify, you write 4-act books, correct? Because I think
Kind of, yeah. So I treat it like
did as well.
Act 1, and then Act 2 is really like 50% of the book, and so it's
Right.
2 columns, and then Act 3. But yeah, it's like 4 columns though.
Yep.
Kristin, love your Star Wars figures there. I couldn't keep my eyes off of them.
Thank you. Those are my husband's.
Okay.
This is his
Well,
office. It has a door.
They make a good backdrop. I really like that. And
They seem
and
pretty
Kimberly-
Empire heavy.
Yeah.
and
Oh
Kimberly-
my gosh. Yes. Good
That's true.
eye.
That's true. Yes, he's a dark soul.
Zach,
Yes, he is.
I did see one question about someone was saying when you changed,
Yeah.
agents, was there ever a time
Which-
an agent did not want to let?
I have the questions pulled up. We'll go
Okay.
through them because
They're
there's
getting out
actually
of
a few
order,
them.
Shelli.
Sorry.
Yes. All right. So we have a few questions, and we also have one comment. I'll read the comment first. I recently published and have faced so many hurdles while I also keep putting a brave face on my social media. It feels a bit jarring. Thank you for letting me know I'm not alone. And I think it's always important for writers to know that they're not alone, because everything that we do is solitary and in our heads and alone. So very, very important to find your people and share your stories.
And
that's-
worse now that we can't get out and see each other as much.
Right.
Agreed.
It's been
Agreed.
doubly hard. Yeah.
I feel like
That's why writing conferences are so important as well.
I was going to say that too. I feel like building a community and a network, it's kind of how we all lean on each other. And writers are really good behind the scenes, especially. Writers are really good at having each other's backs and good resources to kind of call up and say, hey, I'm feeling pretty down and here's what's happening. And everybody kind of can commiserate with each other. So it's good to get out there and meet those other writers.
Yes, absolutely. And actually mentioning conferences, I'll lead into a question on that one from Daniel. I realize virtual conferences and other forms of networking are and will remain a fact of life. I've done both now, live and virtual, but I haven't pitched virtual with an agent yet. Do you think it will be measurably different? And if so, what do you think could be done by the writer to make the experience more personable?
By pitching on video, like on Zoom?
Yeah, just as pitching to an agent virtually, like the differences in that.
I mean, I would say anytime you're pitching, whether it's virtual, you like know the agent, know their stuff. I learned something back all the way in consulting that in order to build trust and I always try to make a personal connection with my agents, with my agent, with my editors, with authors, even when I'm interviewing for jobs, I always try to find that personal connection that leans it away from business. So if there's any way to research and find out a little bit about that agent, don't be stalky and like weird, but it always helps to kind of bridge that gap and build some rapport.
Having run a conference with these virtual meetings for agents, I can tell you that like fundamentally there's no difference at all. You just don't have that table and physical space between you and the person. And it's always vital to remember, and I tell this to writers all the time, that person on the other side of the screen, on the other side of the table, they are human just like you. They have wants and needs, and they are trying their hardest to find the books that match what they want to represent.
Yeah, I think too, letting this agent know why you are the person that has to write this story. I think that there are, my high school English teacher used to always say there are only 7 stories. I think we've all heard that. But I think, showing your passion for why you are the one to be this storyteller is very important and goes a long way.
So one thing to jump off what Zach said is, I think remembering that they're people, talk to them as opposed to just rehearsing a speech to them. Like they really are just, I know a couple agents who they've come back from conferences, or they've been in a bidding thing against other agents for a project. They get disappointed when they lose something to another agent. So they, like he said, they are looking for, if they fall in love with something or someone and they want to sign that client, they're disappointed. So they really are out there looking for something to fall in love with, and remembering that you're talking to them the same way, that have a conversation, as opposed to just, I pitched in person and I was so nervous, and I could feel that red creeping up my neck and up my cheeks. And I felt like I was so just horribly, I couldn't remember what words meant, and it was terrible. But, just remember that, hey, it's kind of cool to be there talking to them, and you're getting a few minutes of their time, and just like Shelli said, get to know them a little bit.
Our pitch sessions are 10 minutes. And I always tell writers, take the first minute and just ask the agent how they're doing. How has their day been? What was their trip like? Whatever you got to do, just personal, friendly, opening questions. It eases the nerves and helps relax both sides of the table. All right. This one says to anyone, but I know it's going to apply to Alan and Shelli. When you changed agents, was there ever a time when the agent did not want to let you go? And if so, how did you handle it?
No, I think when I left, when my agent and I had a conversation, and I think we kind of agreed that we were, ships in the night, missing each other and not quite connecting on a project. And I think, we were both very sad. I mean, there were definitely tears. So Alan, you've been through more agents than I have, but I would say yes,
I burned through them.
No
yeah. No, two of them were not excited that I was leaving. And one of them, I felt like that was because she just had no idea how much we were not clicking. Like I was like, how do you not see this?
Mm-hmm.
With the other one, I had a really long relationship with that agent, and a really friendly one, and still friendly with this agent, and had, visited their home before, when I was in New York and that sort of thing, and so it was really difficult, and they didn't want to let me go because they kind of wanted to make it work. But I said, okay, well, cool. Let's try a little bit longer. And here are the things that I have that are going wrong, that I feel like are not working. I really kind of had a come to Jesus call with this agent, and they said, oh, I'll do better. And then in the next little bit, things really weren't demonstrably any different. And so instead of just calling up out of the blue and saying, this doesn't work, I'm done, I felt like I really owed it to this person who was a friend and had been with me for a while, to say, these are the things that aren't working. Can we fix this? I need to tell you this just out. Like I've given you hints, I've tried to make it clear, but you're not getting it. So here are the things that aren't working. And when nothing really changed in that relationship, that's when I was able to call back and say, I think I got to move on. And at that point, they were like, I hate that you're going, but I understand. And so, but each time was like the hardest damn thing I have ever done, because I am not the kind of person to just bail on somebody like that. And I try to develop a really good relationship with each of my agents. And I was super afraid, of course, each time that I wasn't going to be able to find a new agent. And in fact, that time I immediately sent out queries to, I think 6 or 8 agents. And like that day got 2 rejections immediately, and only ended up with 2 of them of the 8 really going any farther into a conversation. And I was like, oh my God, what mistake have I made? So it's a really difficult thing. But again, as Shelli said, an agent who is not in your corner is worse really than having no agent at all. It's true.
Yeah. And I would even say not even in your corner. I mean, like just connecting. It's just like It's that connection in writing, and that changes over your professional relationship. Like you might connect on several projects, and then their life situation changes, your life situation changes, you're writing something different, they're interested in something different, and you just start to not click, like a relationship. And it's not that anybody's doing anything wrong, it's just that click isn't there. And this business is hard enough as it is. We don't need like to have, the agent works for us. We don't need more blocks than the blocks we're already getting.
Right. There's already enough people telling you no and roadblocks to overcome. And the last thing you need is for that person who's supposed to be working in tandem with you to be another roadblock.
Yeah. So when you get an agent call, like get on the phone call and you're interviewing the agent as much as they're interviewing you. What are you looking for? Where do you see my career? Where, like, make sure, because I know sometimes we will just pick them up very quickly because we're like an agent, but then you're kind of in the situation where you're blocked if they're not liking something and you cannot move forward.
Are they editorial, or do they want to read everything that you write and then give you notes and then have you rewrite it? Are they not editorial? Are they the kind of agent who understands like wanting to get a good advance but not having to blow the doors out with your advance so that you earn out more, and you feel confident to come back? Or are they an agent who wants to get the absolute maximum amount of money with a deal, even if that means that you may not be able to sell the next book to an editor because your first book didn't earn out? Like, those are questions that everybody has a different answer to. Every author is going to feel differently about that. And so it's finding somebody who has the same sort of career goals that you do for yourself.
Yeah, look for an agent like you look for a partner in life. Like, it's got to be there.
All right, so we've got one more question and time to handle it. And I think this is a good one to end it on. How much does the friendship and support of other writers help your writing mental health?
It's everything. I don't know.
It's everything. I was going to say that too. Yeah. Sorry, my dog is at the door. Now, I think Kimberly touched on this a little bit too, but I think only other authors get it. And as much as, my spouse is 100% supportive, 100%, my number one cheerleader he is, but he also doesn't know about publishing and what it means to have your date bumped and what it means to have the come to Jesus talk with an agent or an editor or something like that. And as much as he is wonderful about being a sounding board, your coworkers are other authors. They're your peers and they are everything. They're everything.
So we went to, I don't think Kristin was there, but Alan and Shelli were there. We went to the Writers Police Academy like years ago. And there was a police officer talking about how nobody understands police officers except other law enforcement agents and other people in law enforcement, because so they're like this community unto themselves that nobody understands. And I was sitting there thinking, that's writers. Nobody really understands. Like, you can work in an office somewhere and somebody else who works in another office can commiserate the end of the day. They can go, oh, my boss is a jerk too, Writers, exactly what Kristin said. Like, you really don't really understand what it's like to have submitted something that you love and got those same completely subjective responses, like, I love your character, but I hate your plot. I love your plot, but I hate your character. And everything in between, I didn't like the setting, but I loved, the world building, or something, just completely random, when a lot of it is the stars and moon aligning on the same day that their dog didn't get run over or something, like, it's all these other things. And writers really get that, like, at the end of the day, that watering hole, you meet at the watering hole and you're like, oh my gosh, please have my back on this. And they really do understand. So I think that's what I was saying is, find your people, find your tribe so that you can commiserate about everything. Because you need somebody, no matter what stage you're at, no matter whether you're writing your first page or whether you're writing your 20th book, you need that.
I have a lot of writer friends, including everybody on this panel, and tons more people I've met at conventions and in the Southeast in particular, since this is my home base and everybody else is here too. And so, like, but I just last week got together with a few writer friends that I hadn't seen in forever, since long before the pandemic. And it was so good to talk shop. It was just great to sit around and commiserate and to celebrate successes, but also to, somebody had an editor who hadn't gotten her notes for 2 years. And we were like, oh my God, you've got to get out of this bad relationship. And, somebody else who was looking for an agent, and we're all throwing out names and talking about good fits. And what you need is that community to say, you're not alone. We've all been there. And here, look, I learned this the hard way. Let me tell you what I think you should do. And, everybody's going to end up making their own decisions and living their own lives and having their own writing careers. But having that support system is really essential. What Kim said about, within an industry, you really know it like nobody else, even better than your spouses do. So even, because they hear you complaining about it all the time. But no, you find that writer community has been absolutely essential. And the kids book world in particular has been really supportive. But I know I've seen the adult science fiction and fantasy world. I've seen the adult romance writers world. I've seen the adult thriller writers world, and they're all exactly the same. Everybody is super supportive, and nobody else has to fail for you to succeed. And so if you can do anything to become a part of one of those communities, whatever it is you're writing, do it.
Yeah. And I would say, I'm a copywriter, and I don't have the same relationship with other copywriters that I have with writers, because when we write, it's our heart, like our heart is going on the page. So it's not just having a community to kind of check off. It's, I have water cooler conversations, at my client sites. It's not the same. Like, you have to have writer people that understand what it's like to put your heart on the page, and then have everybody walk all over it and rip it apart and judge it and tell you what's wrong with it. And, and you just want to express yourself. You have to have like people who get the emotional side of writing. And my husband's very supportive as well, but he doesn't get the emotional side of it. Like what I'm putting on that page, everything that went into that character that's from me, that somebody just said they didn't like. So that's
the other thing. The other thing that comes of writers talking to writers is they are never in any hurry to finish. And they will continue to talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, because we love talking writing. Now, on that note, we have to stop talking now. But a couple things first. One, thank you to Will for manning the chat over there, and he's got links and he's got information and everything over there. If you want a copy of the chat, send me an email at zach@broadleafwriters.com. That's ZACH @broadleafwriters.com, and I can get you a copy of that. If you would like to revisit this, or if you showed up late, I noticed we had one in the Q&A asking this question. There will be an edited version of this on our YouTube channel next week. It's Broadleaf Writers Association that you have to look up on YouTube, but all of our previous Right Now videos are there, and this one will be up probably by Monday or Tuesday of next week. So thank you, Shelli, Kristin, Alan, Kimberly. Wonderful conversation. Absolutely loved it. We could keep doing this for hours, I know. And thank you to everybody who came out. Really happy to see such a nice large crowd of people wanting to listen to you guys talk and talk about writing and everything. So please check out broadleafwriters.com. Check out our conference. Check out other conferences. We're not just about ourselves. We want writers to find their people. So, and on that note, thank you again, and good night all.
Bye.